David Chen is 32 years old, working as systems engineer at orbital construction facility above Earth. His life is ordinary, technical work maintaining equipment supporting space infrastructure development, routine assignments requiring competence without particular distinction, comfortable existence without dramatic complications. Until the day the Thessari Imperial flagship enters Earth's orbit. The massive vessel dwarfs every human construct in the system. Thessari Empire controls territories spanning dozens of star systems, one of the galaxy's dominant powers, commanding military and economic resources that make human civilization seem provincial by comparison. The flagship's arrival creates immediate diplomatic tension. Thessari vessels occasionally visit Sol system for alliance coordination, but never the sovereign's personal flagship. Never with full ceremonial escort, suggesting official state visit rather than routine diplomatic consultation. Earth's governments scramble to understand what prompted unexpected imperial visit. Alliance protocols are activated. Senior diplomatic personnel mobilized to receive whatever Thessari delegation the flagship has brought. Then David receives communication that transforms confusion into personal crisis. Official summons, sealed with Thessari imperial authority, directing him, specifically him, David Chen, ordinary systems engineer with no diplomatic standing or political significance, to present himself aboard the flagship for audience with Empress Seraphina herself. David stares at the summons in complete disbelief. Why would Thessari Empress personally summon unknown human engineer? He has no connection to Thessari government. He's never been involved in alliance diplomatic matters. His only contact with Thessari civilization was. The memory hits him with force of physical impact. 23 years ago, age 9, his family was assigned to frontier colony world where human and Thessari settlements existed in close proximity due to territorial agreements about border region development. There was Thessari girl, same approximate age, daughter of some Thessari official whose position David's childhood self didn't understand or care about. They played together despite cultural differences, children finding connection that adult political frameworks complicated. Her name was Seraphina. One evening, sitting under unfamiliar constellations that frontier colony world provided, they made childhood vow, whispered promise that they would stand beside each other forever. That no matter what happened, they would remain connected. When we were children, it was nothing more than promise whispered under alien stars. They laughed about the dramatic declaration, swore eternal friendship with absolute conviction that 9-year-olds bring to commitments they don't understand the weight of. Then she left. Her family's assignment to the frontier colony concluded. David's family remained another 2 years before transferring back to Earth. The childhood friendship ended as such relationships typically do, natural conclusion when circumstances separate people, without ongoing contact maintaining connection. Years passed. David grew up, pursued education, built career. The frontier colony friendship became distant memory, pleasant childhood experience without ongoing significance to his adult life. He never followed Thessari political developments, never paid attention to which officials held which positions in their governmental hierarchy. The girl he'd played with as child, he assumed she'd built whatever life Thessari culture and her family's circumstances directed, completely separate from his human existence. He thought she had forgotten the childhood vow. He'd certainly relegated it to category of innocent childhood promises that don't survive into adult reality. Until the day her flagship entered Earth's orbit, and royal summons carried his name. David contacts Alliance Diplomatic Corps, hoping for clarification about why Thessari Empress is summoning random engineer to Imperial flagship. Ambassador Marcus Webb handles the inquiry with barely concealed alarm. Engineer Chen, we're trying to understand the summons ourselves. Thessari Imperial Communications don't explain why Her Imperial Majesty is requesting your presence. Do you have any connection to Thessari government that would explain sovereign-level attention to Alliance civilian with no diplomatic standing? I knew her as a child, David explains, still processing the impossible connection. 23 years ago, on Frontier Colony World. We were 9 years old. We played together for 6 months before her family transferred elsewhere. We made childhood vow about standing beside each other forever. Then we lost contact, and I never saw her again. Webb is silent for several seconds processing this information. You're telling me that Thessari Empress, ruler of territories spanning dozens of star systems, commanding one of galaxy's most powerful civilizations, is your childhood friend, and you made some kind of binding vow together when you were 9 years old. It wasn't binding vow, David protests. It was childhood promise made by 9-year-olds who didn't understand what they were saying. Kids make dramatic declarations all the time without creating actual obligations. I never imagined she'd become empress, and I certainly never thought childhood friendship would have ongoing significance decades later. But apparently she imagined it differently, Webb observes. Or she's honoring childhood promise for reasons we don't yet understand. Either way, Thessari Empress has entered Earth's orbit with her personal flagship specifically to summon you to Imperial audience. That's not casual diplomatic gesture. That's sovereign making statement about connection she considers significant enough to justify unprecedented official visit. What do I do? David asks. Do I refuse the summons? Do I explain that childhood vow was innocent promise without ongoing validity? Do I just comply and hope this is brief meeting, where she acknowledges old friendship before returning to imperial responsibilities? You comply, Webb states firmly. Refusing summons from visiting sovereign, that creates diplomatic incident affecting entire alliance relationship. Whatever childhood connection she's honoring, you respond with appropriate respect and let her explain why promise made 23 years ago matters enough to bring Imperial flagship to Earth orbit. David is transported to the flagship by diplomatic shuttle. The vessel's scale is overwhelming. Interior spaces designed to demonstrate imperial power through architectural grandeur. Ceremonial guards positioned throughout corridors. Nobles and officials moving with practiced choreography that communicates Thessari governmental sophistication. He's escorted to private audience chamber. Not throne room. This meeting is personal rather than formal state proceeding, but still elaborate enough to communicate sovereign authority through environmental design. Empress Serafina enters, and David's childhood memories collide with present reality. She's obviously the same person. Thessari features he remembers from childhood, though matured through 23 years of development. But she's also completely transformed, bearing sovereign authority with practiced ease, chromatic patterns showing controlled colors appropriate for official capacity, presence that commands attention through cultivated power rather than through childhood personality. She looks at David with expression mixing recognition and something that might be relief. David Chen, 23 years. I've been watching for a moment when circumstances would allow me to honor childhood vow we made. That moment has finally arrived. David executes appropriate bow, diplomatic protocol Webb hastily briefed him on during shuttle transport. Your Imperial Majesty, I'm honored by your summons, though I confess confusion about why childhood friendship warrants sovereign attention after 23 years of separation. The friendship wasn't casual, Serafina responds, and the vow we made wasn't innocent childhood promise without ongoing significance. In Thessari culture, vows exchanged between children, especially vows about standing beside each other forever, those create binding obligations that don't expire just because participants grow up and circumstances separate them. But we were 9 years old, David protests. We didn't understand what we were promising. We were just kids making dramatic declarations about eternal friendship without comprehending that such commitments might have actual lasting meaning. In Thessari culture, childhood vows are considered especially binding precisely because they're made without political calculation, Serafina explains. Adult promises are suspect. They might be strategic rather than genuine. But commitments made by children, those are assumed to reflect authentic connection rather than calculated benefit. The fact that we were 9 makes the vow more significant, not less. I didn't know Thessari culture treats childhood promises as binding, David says with growing alarm. I thought we were making casual friendship commitment that would naturally end when circumstances separated us. I never imagined it would create ongoing obligation, lasting into adult life. I know you didn't understand the cultural weight, Serafina acknowledges. You were human child interacting with Thessari friend, without awareness that different cultural frameworks applied to promises you exchanged. But my culture treats the vow as binding regardless of whether you understood its significance when making it. What does binding mean practically? David asks. What obligations does childhood vow create that bring you to Earth orbit with Imperial flagship to summon engineer you knew briefly as child? The vow we made, standing beside each other forever, in Thessari understanding, that creates mutual support obligation, Serafina explains. We promise to remain connected regardless of circumstances, to honor each other's needs, to stand together when challenges arise. Those commitments don't expire just because we lost contact for 23 years. But I can't stand beside Empress ruling territories across dozens of star systems, David objects. I'm systems engineer working on orbital construction. I have no capacity to support sovereign authority operating at galactic political level. The vow might be binding in your culture, but it's practically impossible for me to fulfill given our vastly different positions. The practical impossibility is why I'm here, Serafina responds. For 23 years I've honored the vow by watching for you, tracking your development, noting your career progression, waiting for moment when circumstances would allow me to bring you into proximity where mutual support obligation could be fulfilled. That moment has arrived. I'm offering you position within my imperial structures that allows childhood vow to become active commitment, rather than remaining dormant promise waiting for opportunity. You're offering me position in Thessari imperial government, David asks with disbelief, based on childhood vow made 23 years ago when we were 9. I'm offering you position as personal advisor with focus on technological systems and human cultural perspective, Serafina clarifies. Your engineering expertise provides genuine value. This isn't just creating ceremonial position to honor childhood vow, but the vow is what motivates the offer. I'm creating circumstances where we can actually stand beside each other, as we promised rather than maintaining separation that prevents vow fulfillment. This is insane, David responds. You're asking me to leave my life on Earth, abandon my career and community, relocate to Thessari imperial structures to serve as your advisor, all because we made childhood promise about eternal friendship 23 years ago. I'm asking you to honor the vow you made, Serafina states. Whether you understood its cultural weight at the time is irrelevant to the obligation it created. We promised to stand beside each other. I'm creating opportunity for that promise to be fulfilled, rather than remaining unfulfilled due to separation and circumstance. And if I refuse, David asks, if I explain that I never understood the vow as binding commitment and that I'm declining the position you're offering, then you break the vow, Serafina responds simply. In Thessari culture, that's serious violation. But more importantly, you deny yourself opportunity for connection that childhood friendship suggested was valuable enough to warrant eternal commitment. The vow might have been made in innocence, but the sentiment behind it, wanting to remain connected to person you valued, that sentiment was real even if you didn't understand the cultural framework that made it binding. Commander Kethara, present as witness to the private audience, speaks carefully. Your Imperial Majesty, with respect, conscripting human civilian into imperial service based on childhood vow he didn't understand the significance of. That creates diplomatic complications with alliance governments and ethical questions about honoring commitments made without informed consent. I'm not conscripting him, Serafina clarifies. I'm offering position he can accept or refuse. The cultural obligation exists whether he accepts the offer or not. But I'm creating genuine opportunity rather than just invoking vow to compel service. He doesn't want to provide. She addresses David. The position I'm offering is real advisory role with genuine responsibilities. Your engineering expertise and human cultural perspective, those provide actual value to imperial planning. This isn't just honoring childhood vow through ceremonial appointment. It's creating circumstances where vow can be fulfilled through meaningful partnership that serves both our interests. You brought Imperial flagship to Earth orbit, David observes. That's not casual recruitment visit. That's sovereign making dramatic statement about importance of securing my acceptance. Why does childhood vow matter enough to justify unprecedented official visit to human homeworld? Because vows matter, Serafina responds with quiet intensity. Because commitments made in genuine friendship shouldn't be abandoned just because circumstances change. Because you were person I valued enough to promise eternal connection when we were 9. And that value doesn't disappear just because 23 years and vast differences in circumstance now separate us. The vow matters because the connection it represented matters, not just in childhood but throughout our lives. David processes this extraordinary situation. Childhood friend became ruler of the stars. Innocent promise became binding obligation. And now he faces choice about whether to honor commitment he made without understanding its weight, or to refuse and accept consequences of breaking vow in culture that takes such commitments seriously. I need time to consider, David says. This is life-altering decision that affects my career, my community, my entire future. I can't make it based on pressure to honor childhood vow I didn't understand the significance of. Take the time you need, Serafina agrees. But understand that the vow exists whether you spend days deliberating or years avoiding decision. The obligation is present. The question is whether you choose to honor it through accepting position that creates genuine partnership, or whether you refuse. David returns to Earth in turmoil. The childhood vow he dismissed as innocent promise, Serafina treats it as binding obligation requiring him to abandon his life to serve in her imperial structures. He consults with Alliance Diplomatic Corps about the situation. Ambassador Webb provides analysis. In Thessari culture, childhood vows are indeed treated as binding commitments. The cultural framework assumes that promises made without political calculation reflect genuine connection worth preserving. Empress Serafina isn't inventing obligation. She's applying legitimate cultural understanding to commitment you actually made, even if you didn't realize its significance at the time. But I was 9 years old, David protests again. Surely there's cultural understanding that children can't make binding lifelong commitments without informed consent about what they're agreeing to. Thessari culture assumes children's promises are more binding because they're made without full understanding of implications, Webb explains. The lack of calculated awareness is seen as making commitment more authentic rather than less valid. Your age when making the vow, that actually strengthens its cultural weight rather than providing reason to dismiss it. So I'm actually bound by childhood promise to serve Empress I knew briefly as 9-year-old. David asks with frustration. There's no cultural escape clause allowing me to refuse based on not understanding what I was committing to. You can refuse, Webb clarifies. Free will exists regardless of cultural obligations. But refusal means breaking vow in culture that takes such violations seriously. That creates personal dishonor in Thessari understanding, and potentially affects broader alliance relationships if sovereign takes offense at vow being broken by human who pleads ignorance of cultural frameworks. David spends 3 days in agonized consideration. His life on Earth is comfortable and stable. The position Serafina offers is completely disruptive, relocating to alien imperial structures, serving sovereign he barely knows despite childhood connection, abandoning community and career he's built over decades. But the childhood memory returns persistently. Sitting under unfamiliar stars with the Thessari girl who became his friend, despite cultural differences, making promise about standing together forever. The genuine warmth of that connection, even at age 9, even without understanding implications, the sentiment was real. And Serafina honored that vow. For 23 years she watched for him, waiting for circumstances allowing her to bring him into proximity where childhood promise could be fulfilled. That dedication to commitment made in childhood innocence, that demonstrates the vow, meant something profound to her regardless of how casually he'd treated it. He makes his decision, returns to the flagship to deliver his answer in person. "I accept the position," he tells Serafina, "not because cultural obligation compels me, not because refusing would create diplomatic complications, but because you honored childhood vow for 23 years while I forgot about it. That dedication deserves reciprocation through accepting opportunity you've created for us to actually stand beside each other as we promised." Serafina shows visible relief, chromatic patterns shifting to colors indicating profound satisfaction. "Thank you. Your acceptance means more than just fulfilling cultural obligation. It means you recognize that childhood connection was worth preserving despite all the years and circumstances that separated us." "I remember you," David says, "not just as childhood friend, but as person I valued enough to promise eternal connection even at age 9. That value doesn't disappear just because I forgot the promise while you remembered it. I'm honoring what we both recognized as children, that our friendship was worth committing to, even if I didn't understand how seriously you would take that commitment." Over following months, David transitions to his role as Serafina's advisor. The adjustment is difficult, learning Thessari imperial structures, understanding political dynamics of galactic governance, adapting to proximity with sovereign, who commands absolute authority while being person he knew as 9-year-old friend. But the childhood connection provides foundation that makes adaptation possible. They rebuild friendship that separation interrupted, not as children making innocent promises, but as adults working together with genuine respect for each other's perspectives and capabilities. 6 months into his advisory role, David reflects on the transformation. "Our childhood vow was joke. 9-year-olds making dramatic declarations about eternal friendship without understanding what we were committing to. I thought you'd forgotten like I did. Instead, you became ruler of the stars and honored that innocent promise for 23 years. That dedication transformed joke into binding reality that reshaped my entire life." "The vow was never joke to me," Serafina responds. "Even as child, I recognized our friendship as valuable connection worth preserving. The promise to stand beside each other forever. I meant it then, and I've maintained that commitment through all the years when circumstances prevented fulfillment. Your acceptance of the advisory position, that finally allows childhood vow to become active partnership rather than dormant promise waiting for opportunity. You brought Imperial flagship to Earth orbit," David recalls. "Summoned me through sovereign authority. Created position allowing us to honor childhood commitment. That's extraordinary effort to preserve promise made by 9-year-olds under frontier colony stars. Because commitments made in genuine connection deserve preservation," Serafina states. "We recognize something valuable in each other as children. That value didn't disappear when circumstances separated us. It waited for opportunity to be fulfilled through adult partnership that honors what we promised without fully understanding. The childhood vow became binding reality because the connection it represented was always real. We just needed time and circumstances to create context where promise could be actively lived rather than just passively remembered. 1 year after accepting the advisory position, David has fully integrated into Serafina's imperial structures. The partnership they've built combines professional cooperation with renewed personal friendship, working relationship that fulfills childhood vow while serving genuine governmental purposes. During private conversation marking anniversary of his acceptance, Serafina addresses how childhood promise shaped their adult relationship. When I became empress, everyone around me formed connections based on political calculation. Nobles seeking favor, officials wanting advancement, diplomats pursuing alliance benefits. You're only person in my life whose connection predates my sovereign authority. Our friendship was formed when we were just children without power or position. The vow we made then, that promise is only relationship I have that wasn't created through political framework. That's why the childhood vow mattered so much, David realizes. Not just because Thessari culture treats such promises as binding, but because you needed connection based on genuine friendship rather than political calculation. The 9-year-old who promised to stand beside you forever. That person had no idea you'd become empress and couldn't be forming friendship to gain advantage. Exactly, Serafina confirms. The childhood friendship is only relationship I have where I can be certain the connection is authentic rather than strategic. Your acceptance of advisory position, that allows childhood authenticity to continue into adult partnership. You stand beside me now not because I'm empress you're seeking favor from, but because we promised to support each other when we were children who valued friendship over any political consideration. Our childhood vow was joke, David reflects, until you became ruler of the stars and made it binding reality. The innocent promise became obligation that reshaped my life. But the obligation serves genuine connection that deserves preservation. Not just because cultural framework treats childhood vows as binding, but because friendship we formed as 9-year-olds was valuable enough to warrant the commitment we made without understanding its full implications. 2 years after David accepted the advisory position, their partnership has become an essential element of how Serafina governs. His human perspective and engineering expertise provide genuine value beyond just honoring childhood vow. The connection they rebuilt from childhood friendship has developed into relationship combining personal trust with professional effectiveness. During formal governmental reception, Lord Vethros, who initially objected to conscripting human civilian based on childhood vow, acknowledges the partnership's value. When Her Imperial Majesty first brought Imperial flagship to Earth orbit to summon childhood friend to advisory service, many of us questioned whether honoring 9-year-old's promise was appropriate basis for governmental appointment. But Advisor Chen has proven that childhood vow was recognizing genuine compatibility that serves imperial interests alongside personal connection. The vow wasn't creating artificial obligation, Serafina observes. It was recognizing valuable connection that deserved preservation. We promised to stand beside each other because we valued the friendship enough to want it to continue. The promise became binding because the connection it represented was always real. We just needed circumstances allowing adult partnership to fulfill what children promised without full understanding. David reflects on how childhood memory shaped his present. When we were 9, sitting under frontier colony stars, we made promise about eternal friendship. I thought it was innocent declaration that circumstances would render irrelevant. You knew, or your culture taught you, that childhood vows create binding obligations worth preserving through decades of separation. Your dedication to that promise brought Imperial flagship to Earth orbit and offered me position that transformed my entire life. The transformation serves both of us, Serafina responds. You provide perspective I couldn't access without genuine friendship predating sovereign authority. I provide opportunities for your capabilities that Earth orbital construction couldn't offer. The childhood vow created framework, but adult partnership provides substance that makes fulfillment valuable rather than just obligatory. 3 years after acceptance, David faces moment that tests whether childhood vow created genuine mutual support or just one-sided obligation benefiting Serafina. Political crisis emerges threatening Serafina's sovereign authority. Factional disputes about succession planning create instability requiring careful navigation. The crisis is internal Thessari matter. David's human perspective and engineering expertise don't obviously apply to governmental challenges about imperial succession frameworks. Serafina could handle the crisis through established Thessari political channels without involving David, but she requests his perspective. The childhood vow was mutual promise. I've provided you position and opportunities, fulfilling my obligation to stand beside you. Now I need you to fulfill yours, to stand beside me during challenge, where your support matters not because of technical expertise, but because I trust you in ways I can't trust political advisors whose loyalties might be divided by factional interests. I don't know Thessari succession politics well enough to provide expert guidance, David admits. How can I stand beside you effectively when the crisis requires understanding I don't possess? I don't need expert political guidance, Serafina clarifies. I need trusted perspective from person whose connection to me predates and transcends current factional disputes. The childhood vow gives you unique position. You're only advisor whose loyalty I can be absolutely certain of, because our relationship was formed before I had power worth manipulating connections to access. That certainty is what I need during crisis, where I can't fully trust anyone whose relationship with me is based on my sovereign authority. David provides the support she needs, not through political expertise, but through genuine friendship offering honest perspective without calculated agenda. His outsider status combined with trustworthy connection allows Serafina to navigate crisis with confidence that at least one advisor is providing guidance based on her interests rather than factional calculations. After crisis resolves, Serafina acknowledges how childhood vow created mutual benefit. When I summoned you 3 years ago, it appeared I was conscripting you to serve my needs through honoring binding cultural obligation. But the vow was always mutual promise. You've stood beside me during political crisis in ways that politically connected advisors couldn't, because childhood friendship created trust transcending governmental frameworks. The vow serves both of us, not just creating your obligation to me, but creating my certainty about you that no political relationship could provide. Our childhood vow was joke, David reflects, until you became ruler of the stars and transformed innocent promise into binding reality, reshaping both our lives. The joke became truth because connection we recognized as children was always valuable enough to warrant preservation. We just needed time and circumstances, creating context, where promise could be actively fulfilled, rather than remaining distant memory of frontier colony friendship. The vow matters because the friendship mattered, Serafina agrees. We promised to stand beside each other forever because even at 9 years old, we recognized connection worth committing to. The promise seemed innocent because we didn't understand its implications. But the sentiment was authentic. We valued each other enough to want eternal friendship. That authentic childhood recognition became binding adult reality because circumstances allowed us to honor what we promised without fully comprehending the weight of commitment we were making. 5 years after David's acceptance of the advisory position, they sit together watching stars from observation deck of Serafina's flagship. Visual echo of sitting under frontier colony constellations, as children making promises they didn't fully understand. When we made the vow, David says, we were just kids wanting friendship to continue. We didn't imagine you'd become empress. Didn't understand promise would create binding obligation. Didn't anticipate that innocent declaration would reshape my life decades later when your flagship entered Earth orbit. But we understood that connection was valuable, Serafina responds. We recognized friendship worth preserving through commitment to stand beside each other. The understanding was incomplete. The implications were beyond our comprehension, but the core recognition that our connection mattered enough to warrant promise, that was always true. The vow became binding reality because what it represented was always real, just waiting for circumstances allowing fulfillment. Childhood promises becoming adult obligations, David reflects. Innocent vows transforming into binding commitments. The girl who made promise about eternal friendship becoming ruler of the stars, and honoring that promise through bringing imperial flagship to summon the boy who made it with her. Our childhood vow was joke until you made it reality. And the reality serves us both because the connection we recognized as children was always valuable enough to warrant the preservation we promised, without understanding what we were committing to. Our childhood vow was a joke, until she became ruler of the stars. We laughed. We swore to stand beside each other forever. Then she left. Years passed. Empires shifted. And the girl who once made that vow rose higher than anyone could have imagined. I thought she had forgotten, until the day her flagship entered Earth's orbit, and a royal summons carried my name, childhood innocence and galactic power. When a forgotten promise becomes politically dangerous and deeply personal, what we dismiss as children can reshape our future when circumstances change everything. That changes everything.